Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Institute of Politics webinar with Admiral William McRaven. I am Lieutenant Commander Ryan Hall, an active duty SEAL in the Navy, and my first year of the full-time MBA program at the Booth School of Business. It's such a privilege and treat to have the opportunity to introduce our guest today. Admiral McRaven is an absolute legend in the special operations community and the broader national defense enterprise. He's an accomplished author, academic, administrator, and public commentator and thinker. In short, he's a prolific public servant who has left a legacy that will endure through history. His military service spanned an incredible 37 years. He commissioned as an ensign in the Navy in 1977 after graduating from the University of Texas. Ensign McRaven completed SEAL training the following year, launching a career in which he would lead and command SEALs and personnel from all services at quite literally every level, always with leadership defined by character, critical thought, and communication. His most notable command tours include the Joint Special Operations Command and finally, U.S. Special Operations Command, the Unified Combatant Command that oversees all special operations in the Department of Defense. It's an organization of roughly 70,000 people. During his incredible career, Admiral McRaven led multiple historic operations, including the capture of Saddam Hussein, the rescue of the merchant mariner Captain Richard Phillips, and most notably, he was the architect and commander of Operation Neptune Spear, the operation to capture or kill Osama bin Laden in 2011. Coincidentally, that was also the year he assumed the title of the Bullfrog, the recognition as the longest serving SEAL in the force. I'll leave it to the Admiral to let us know which one he's more proud of. Following his retirement in 2014, Admiral McRaven was selected to lead the University of Texas system as chancellor, a position that he held for 3 years before stepping down in 2018. As an author, he has multiple books and editorial pieces published. He literally wrote the book on special operations. His 1993 thesis from the Naval Postgraduate School on the tenets of special operations is orthodoxy in every special operations leadership course. More recently, he's published Sea Stories, a memoir of his life in special ops, as well as Make Your Bed, a collection of wisdom and anecdotes that spun off of his viral 2014 commencement address at the University of Texas, viewed by millions online. And this makes him the only person in history as famous for making his bed as for getting the world's most wanted man. Finally, his editorials have been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. Our moderator today is the Institute of Politics founding director, former senior strategist and advisor to President Obama and the University of Chicago's own, Mr. David Axelrod. Please help me in welcoming these two outstanding public servants today. Gentlemen, thank you and welcome.
Thanks, Ryan. Great to be here.
Ryan, thank you. And thank you for your service. As I told you before we started this, and Admiral McRaven, I'm sure, can appreciate this. One of the greatest honors that I had in working for the president was to travel the world with him and meet with service members around the country as he did, around the world as he did, sometimes in places of great peril. And it was really inspiring. And you, Ryan, inspire us. So thank you for that and your great words. Admiral, great to see you again. We are 2 days after Veterans Day, and that was the occasion for this event. There are plenty of public issues right now that are current that I want to ask you about, but I want to defer that for a moment and just talk about service itself. And I want to start by talking about how you came by service, because you came by it naturally. You grew up in a family of service. Tell me about your dad, who was quite an interesting person.
Yeah, thanks. First, David, thanks for extending the invitation to join you here today. This is terrific. I certainly enjoy spending time with you and the students at the IOP. So yeah, you're right. I kind of came by it naturally. My father was a World War II fighter pilot, flew Spitfires actually, which was a British airplane because at the time, when we entered the war, the Americans didn't have a plane that could take on the German Messerschmitt. So the Brits loaned us Spitfires, and Dad flew that for about 2 years during the war. But my grandfather had also served in World War I and he served in World War II. He was an Army surgeon. So I remember my dad kind of later in life, as I was getting ready to join the service, he said, I remember what got me in the service. It was when I was a young boy, I saw the soldiers heading off to France in World War I board the trains in his small town. And he said there was such a sense of pride, there was such a sense of duty and patriotism that it was really infectious. And that is really, in addition to obviously watching his father, that really kind of spurred him to join the military. And then I grew up as an Air Force brat, and of course loved my time in the military families, and just seeing the remarkable dedication of not only the military members but their families.
How does an Air Force brat end up in the Navy SEALs?
Well, good question. So I had thought about flying, and my dad, having been a fighter pilot, was kind of nudging me in that direction. But interestingly enough, I think it was my close to my senior year in high school, my sister was dating an Army Green Beret, and of course this was after the movie with John Wayne had come out, The Green Berets, and I had this fascination with the Green Berets. Well, this young Army captain came to pick her up for a date, and she was, as usual, kind of late. So I was entertaining the young captain, and he said, what are you getting ready to do? And I said, well, I think I'm going to join the Navy. I've got a scholarship, ROTC scholarship. And he said, well, then you better become a Navy SEAL. Back in, this was 1973. I'd never heard of Navy SEALs. Frankly, nobody had heard of Navy SEALs back in that point in time. But here you had an Army Green Beret telling me to be a Navy SEAL. And that really is kind of what headed me in that trajectory.
And you spent 37 years in the SEALs. You can explain the bullfrog, the bullfrog title. And special operations became more and more significant over time. And you literally wrote the book on it. Why has special operations become such an important part of defense?
Well, so when you look back over the kind of the history, the modern day history of special operations, of course, we had a little bit of a heyday during World War II. You saw these remarkable operations done by all the services, and including U.S. forces under both the OSS, which was the predecessor to the CIA, and then of course we had Navy frogmen during World War II, and we had Army special operations, and then after World War II, it kind of waned a little bit. Picked up a little bit in Korea, but then in Vietnam, the Navy SEALs came about, and they were born from the underwater demolition teams, and they really earned this remarkable reputation, kind of fighting the insurgency in Vietnam. But then again, after Vietnam, and this tends to happen after major wars, the reliance or the expectation that we're going to need special operations again kind of declines, which it did. And then when we had the disaster at Desert One, the country did kind of a reassessment of, gee, do we really need special operations? And the answer was, of course we need them. And now we need to professionalize them. And Congress is the one that put in place the U.S. Special Operations Command. And then we really began to institutionalize, professionalize special operations. And by the time 9/11 came along, frankly, we were, bar none, the finest special operations force in the world. Now the question becomes, why do you need them? I'm always quick to point out to folks, look, special operations have a unique niche. They're not going to stop the North Koreans from coming south. They're not going to be able to keep the Straits of Hormuz open. They're not going to be able to stop the Chinese from invading Taiwan. But the things we do exceedingly well. We are very surgical. We can get into a country, work with the allies in a way that sometimes larger battalions can't. And then, of course, you saw after 9/11, the hunt for terrorists, the insurgent fight in Iraq and Afghanistan. Really, those were kind of right in our wheelhouse. So the force has grown tremendously over the last 20 years, and I think done a remarkable job.
Let me ask you about the military generally. We tend to draw from a rather small pool of Americans right now. There's no draft. When your dad enlisted, all of America was in that war, both the mostly men who were fighting and everyone else who was pitching in some other way. A student wrote to me as I was preparing for this and asked me to ask you, about why there isn't more diversity in the upper echelons of the military, and does that have to do with disparities in the American education system? That's one question. And another is just generally, what does it mean for the country that such a small pool of people carry such a large burden?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack in that question. So let me kind of hit the diversity issue first. I think we are continuing to make progress in terms of diversity in the United States military. But as we were a segregated military until 1947, 1948, when Truman initiated the integration, and then you began to see the rise of African Americans in terms of being in more prominent positions. But you still had the challenges of the Civil Rights era and Jim Crow. And when I came in 1977, there was a lot of racial tension in the military. And early on, and I think it was probably 1962, the actual term affirmative action came about. But I didn't really see it until, the 80s sometimes, and you would sit on promotion boards. And the military understood we needed to increase our diversity. So we really had a very aggressive affirmative action program. And when an officer's record would come up, it would say minority or female. And we had a quota. And at first there was a little bit of a reluctance to approach it this way. But what we found was it's not that we didn't have great talent in the diverse pool, but we weren't giving them the opportunity. So once we were able to kind of prime the pump by putting great people, talented people in positions of responsibility, then after a while, we realized we no longer needed to kind of single out the minorities because we had built a deep bench. They were beginning to rise in prominence. We saw the great talent in both the minorities and the female population. And in my career, of course, I've been blessed to work for Colin Powell and Lloyd Austin and Fig Newton. And I worked with Michelle Howard, the first black female 4-star in the Navy, first 4-star female in the Navy. So you are beginning to see a recognition. And I think you've seen it for a while, but it is improving. But we always have to make greater strides. We have to continue to make sure we are promoting the right people. You see CQ Brown running the Air Force now. And I'm always, when I'm asked this question about CQ Brown, the first African-American Chief of Staff of the Air Force, I tell people very quickly, look, if you think CQ Brown was chosen because he was African-American, you don't know CQ Brown. He was chosen because he was the best person for the job. He happens to be African-American, and he's going to be a great role model for the kids in both the Air Force, Army, Navy, and Marine Corps. But he was chosen because he's the best person for the job. And we just need to continue that march forward.
But you do have this disparate, at the rank and file level, you've got large minority representation. It relates to this question, but to a larger point, which is, I always felt like service during World War II created a kind of commonality among Americans of different backgrounds. And I'm sure you found that you served with people of different backgrounds, and it broadened you. This ethic of service and the value of service, how do we recapture that? Because we live in such a polarized time between rural and urban and different communities in our country. How do we, through service, attack that?
Well, to your point, David, you see the young men and women coming into the service, and you may get a white kid from the South and a black kid from Chicago, and once they find themselves in the same squad, in the same company, in the same platoon, all of a sudden those differences begin to kind of fall away, and they realize that they've got a lot more in common than they do apart, and that their differences don't matter when they are focused on a particular mission or an objective. That is the great thing about the service. That has always been the great thing about the service. You're right. What we tend to find today is the demographics of the service continue to be more in the South than in the North. They seem to be more middle class than they are upper class. But I think that this serves us well when you find these young kids that come in, they serve their time in the military, and then a lot of them, of course, get out and they go become great citizens of the United States. And you see many of them today serving in Congress. So we've got to continue to encourage men and women to join the service. I would like to see, a national service program whereby it's not just about, the service in the military, but how do we create something like a national service academy where men and women, much like the Naval Academy or West Point or the Air Force Academy, they are selected by their congressman. They come to a service academy for 4 years, and then they join a national service corps and they have a career in this. The difference is the focus is domestically. So we're going to teach people to be civil engineers. We're going to teach them to be teachers. We're going to teach them skills that are going to help the country. And then we assign them places where, in Flint, Michigan, can they improve the water quality? So I do think national service is important, but until that happens, we just need to encourage young men and women to continue to join. I think that will absolutely help the polarization that you see today. At least that is my hope.
Another question that came my way, which I thought was really good, was what is the one thing that Admiral McRaven wishes his younger self would have known before going into this field?
Yeah, I think the answer is everything's going to be okay. I know that sounds simple, but when you're a young ensign and you're trying to do the best job you can, or when you're a young enlisted man or woman and you're trying to do the best job you can, and challenges get in your way, all of a sudden, they become the most important thing in your life, and you worry about them constantly when in fact they may not be all of that critical, and you just do the best job you can. When I look back on 37 years and I think about the times I sweated things, I think that's good. You have to take, your obligation seriously, but I wish I would have been a little bit more relaxed and realized that hey, you work hard, you work through things. Your friends and your colleagues will help you through the tough times, and you're going to be all right.
When you think back on those 37 years, I'm sure you were inspired by people who served under you, people who led you, but is there one person who you think back on and say, this person embodied what I think is best about service?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I had an awful lot of them, as you said, David. The one thing that people that are in leadership positions, at least, and I know Ryan would say the same thing, what inspires you every day are the men and women that work for you. The fact of the matter is, and particularly during, after 9/11, the young men and women that I saw who raised their hand after 9/11 and said, I'm going to volunteer to go to war. They all knew what they were signing up for. Those of us that came in before 9/11, I mean, it was just a continuation. But that generation that raised their hand, and the thing I enjoyed the most was kind of spending time with these young men and women. You hear their story. Some of them are married with a couple of kids at home. They're E5s making a small salary, and you see their sacrifice. You see their sense of commitment. And man, I'm telling you, that inspires the leaders to do the right thing. Now, I've been fortunate in my career. I have worked for just remarkable men and women. We talk about Colin Powell. I work for Condi Rice. I have worked for both presidents, Bush 43, George W. Bush, for Barack Obama. But I think back on the senior enlisted that I had a chance to spend time with. My Command Sergeant Major, Chris Ferris, a great Army Green Beret and Special Operations non-commissioned officer, one of the smartest guys I ever spent time with. He was my right-hand man. I didn't make any difficult decisions without conferring with my Sergeant Major. When I was in the Navy, I had a great Master Chief named Steve Chamberlain, along the same mold, incredibly disciplined, remarkable enlisted men. So there's inspiration everywhere, and you don't have to look very hard to find it.
What was the hardest day you had in your 37 years?
Yeah, I don't know if I can single out a day, because you have a lot of tough days, particularly in combat. Unfortunately, after 9/11, in the course of my 6 years in and out of Iraq and Afghanistan, I lost a lot of great men and women. That is always hard. It's hard because they were very young, they were very committed to what they were doing. You grieve for their families, and frankly, it's a burden that I'm not sure you ever completely get over, nor should you get over it. There were a lot of hard days. And I don't know that they ever get easier, as I said, and they probably shouldn't.
What about what about the proudest day? What is the day that you look back at and say, wow, that was it. That was really, really extraordinary to be a part of.
Yeah, a lot of people would probably say that I would jump to the Bin Laden raid, but that would not be my first thought. I was incredibly proud of the men that went on the mission to get Bin Laden. They were risking their lives. It was a remarkable mission and certainly brought justice to Bin Laden. But when I think back on the number of missions, and we did thousands of missions from the time I was the deputy commander at JSOC and the commander at JSOC, thousands of them. And the ones that I was always most proud of was when we could rescue an American. And we did a lot of hostage rescues. And the thing about it was we weren't rescuing prominent people. We were rescuing contractors. We were rescuing journalists. We were rescuing, people that we knew we had an obligation as American soldiers to rescue Americans. And when you save someone's life and you realize that you have impacted them, their children, their children's children, because they are alive today because of what you and your men did, that's pretty damn rewarding.
You've also been called upon, and you've called on others to take life. And there has to be some psychic cost of that. There has to be some impact of that. And you've been close in on a lot of action over the course of those 37 years. How do you process that?
Yeah, first, you have to recognize your obligation as a commander. So your obligation as a commander, first and foremost, is the protection of the men and women under your command. So we understand that from the rules of engagement standpoint, from the law of armed conflict, you have you have the authority to protect yourself and you have the obligation to protect others. So whenever we were doing a mission that required striking a target, killing the enemy, you really do have to go through your mind and you have to say, because you've got to live with it. And if you make that mistake, you're going to live with the civilians that you inadvertently killed. You say, am I doing this to protect American soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, civilians? And if you can, in your own mind, make that argument, and if you know that your decision is moral, legal, and ethical, then you can do that. Now, I wasn't always right. And we made mistakes, and innocent men and women died. It is the horror of war. And once again, you have to live with that burden. And let me tell you, there are times at night when those dark memories come up, and you say, what could I have done better? What mistakes did I make, and how could I have corrected them? And then you have to press on. I mean, the one thing I used to tell the young officers is, you're going to make bad decisions periodically, but you can't be afraid to make the next tough decision. Because if you are afraid to make the next tough decision, then you're not the leader that the men and women need you to be. Because every leader is going to make mistakes. Learn from your mistakes, be prepared to make the next tough decision, because that could save more men and women.
You were at the NSA during that critical period, and in Washington during that critical period at the beginning of the war in Iraq and the after 9/11. A lot has been written and a lot has been discussed about the impact of that decision to go to Iraq. We still have troops there. We have troops in Afghanistan. What has the impact been on the country of this prolonged struggle, for which there really isn't a parallel? I mean, Vietnam went on for quite a while, but we're 2 decades, almost 2 decades in now.
Yeah, a great question. When I was I think it was in 2010, maybe September of 2010. I was in Baghdad, and the decision had been made to pull U.S. forces out of Iraq at the beginning, I think, of 2011. And I was down talking to a squadron of SEALs, and there was a SEAL senior chief petty officer who was a little upset. And at one point in time, he said, "Hey, Admiral, WTF? We are going out on missions every night, risking our lives, and we're pulling out of here in 4 months. Why are we continuing to go on these missions?" And the missions at the time were to try to stop this network of suicide bombers that was coming into to Baghdad to hit the markets and those sort of things. And it was a great question. And the only answer I could give the senior chief was, "Look, we came here, we have a responsibility. And let me tell you something. You have no idea about how your missions can change the outcome of the war history. So if you stop a suicide bomber from blowing up a market in Baghdad today, will there have been a young man or woman in that market that was going to find the cure for cancer, that was going to be the prime minister of Iraq in 20 years, that was going to do something great? You just don't know. So you have to do your job. From the military standpoint, we have to do our job. Now, that's not to say you don't sit around and say, what if, why are we doing this? That's not to say you can't, in your own mind, question the policy. You should. And the senior officers certainly have an obligation to raise policy issues with the Secretary of Defense. But more times than not, you have to be satisfied with doing your job. Now, let me take it a little bit broader. I was with President Bush last year or so, a year and a half ago, and somebody asked him the question about his legacy, and in particular, Iraq. And he said something that I thought was very thoughtful. He said, they're still writing books about George Washington, not making the implication that he was George Washington, but he said, people will assess my legacy for, millennia to come. He said, so it is a little bit hard at this point in time, not very far removed from Iraq, to say that it was the right decision or the wrong decision. And I had to think about that. I always, in my mind, questioned whether it was the right decision, but I realized as a leader, I had to get out and lead my troops to do America's business. But having said that, I realized that, history will tell whether or not taking down Saddam Hussein, trying to institute some form of democracy in Iraq was worth the blood and the treasure that we and the Iraqis gave. And I think the jury may still be out on that.
You mentioned him and the other presidents you work for. Talk to me about the leadership lessons you learned from each of them.
Yeah, it's interesting, and you well know, David, having been in there many times, but when you sit in the Situation Room and you have an opportunity to really observe up close how the President of the United States deals with his senior staff, what I guess I was surprised by was the similarities actually between George W. Bush and Barack Obama in terms of how they dealt with their staff. And what I found with both Bush and Obama was they listened. They would listen to their staff. They were happy to have members of their staff disagree. And then they would take that input, go off and make a decision. And I think that was very important, even though, as you know, their personalities are much different. President Obama, much more subdued, although, as you know better than most, he has a great sense of humor and a great personality. Sometimes it didn't come forward publicly. And of course, President Bush, much more outgoing from a public standpoint, but I would offer also very thoughtful kind of behind the scenes. So what both of these leaders understood was listen to the subject matter experts, take in the information, and then make the best decision and the best judgment you can. That is kind of the fundamentals of leadership, I think, in any role any leader would have.
Now, I said I was going to ask you about some of the current events. When I first approached you about coming and speaking, you were reluctant because you didn't want to get drawn. You had criticized President Trump. You didn't want to get drawn into that. It is unusual for military and retired military to be as outspoken as you have been. Was that a hard decision for you? And what kind of feedback did you get from your peers?
Well, it actually was not a hard decision. I thought about it, but it wasn't a hard decision, and I'll walk you through the timeline. You know, one of the things I have told folks is, when I am criticized as a senior leader having spoken out against the president, I always tell people, well, that's fair criticism. We have this unwritten rule that as a retired senior officer, you're not supposed to speak badly about the president. And in general, I think that's a good rule. But I also realized that for myself, I had to wake up, be able to look myself in the mirror and say, am I doing what I think is right? And all of this started when I was the chancellor at the University of Texas, and the president came out and said the press was the enemy of the American people. And I said, I've fought the enemy of the American people, and it's not the press. I've been raked over the coals by the press. I understand how challenging it can be. But at the end of the day, to me, the press, the First Amendment, is maybe the single most important thing we have as part of our Constitution. And for the President of the United States to attack the American press, as I said, was the greatest threat to democracy in my lifetime. And I stand by those words. That, of course, began a number of times when I felt it was appropriate to speak out. I tried not to do it, just every time I was offended by something the president said. I wanted to make sure that if I was going to use my voice and if I was going to have to suffer the slings and arrows, that I wanted to make sure that I was, at least in my own mind, on solid ground. But I've also told folks, look, if you're in the military, if you are a uniformed military person, you cannot speak out against the commander in chief. Not your place. And for those of us that are retired and speak out, the criticism is fair. We've just got to be able to deal with criticism.
What do you make of what's going on? First of all, what is the impact of this president? What has the impact been on the military and on the morale of the military? He's involved the military in ways that are unusual, unique, really. We have an apolitical military, and now we're in this period where he has lost this race. He's fired the leadership of the Pentagon. He's put some very strong ideologues into those positions, including a former general who is Islamophobic and called President Obama a terrorist leader and so on. How does this filter down to people in uniform?
Yeah, well, I certainly wouldn't want to speak for the men and women in uniform in terms of the broad swath of this, because I do think that there is this mix of support for President Trump. There are some folks out there that absolutely believe he is doing the right thing. He is investing more in military hardware, and there is a lot of truth to that. He has obviously continued the pursuit of ISIS in Syria. So he's done some things that I know some of the rank and file believe to be good and appropriate things. Conversely, I know a lot of on the other side that to your point, they think that he has dramatically affected morale by intervening, particularly on some high-profile cases where the military was not actually able to adjudicate the case. Now, the issue going on right now about firing Mark Esper and Joe Kernan and the senior leadership within the Department of Defense. The issue there, of course, as you know, is about this transition. Yes. I was telling somebody the other day when I was the commander of the Joint Special Operations Force in Iraq, and I don't know the exact days, but I would have to brief President Bush on the missions we were getting ready to do that were outside Iraq and Afghanistan, and there were a lot of those. And I remember one day I am briefing from Iraq to the Situation Room there in the White House, and it's President Bush and it's his team. And then several days later, I turn on the video teleconference, and up pops a new president and a new team, with the exception of Bob Gates. That is the way a transition is supposed to work. And again, the days that separated my brief to Bush and Obama, I don't know the exact time frame, but it wasn't very far apart. And the reason the Obama administration was able to come in and get up to speed very quickly is because President Bush had given President Obama and his team a great transition, a great turnover. You really have to have that if you're going to be, focused on national security. So I think the concern I'm seeing from, some of my colleagues now is by kind of, beheading the senior leadership of the military and putting in folks that are certainly, in my opinion, not qualified to do the job at this point. Not necessarily all of them bad guys, but certainly I would say not fully qualified to do the job. That's just going to make it tough. And if we're not allowing the president-elect and his team to do the transition, it puts us at greater risk.
I agree. Let's go to some questions from students, and let's start with Seth, a veteran scholar sergeant in the Marine Corps class of 2024. Seth, are you here?
I am here, thank you. Good afternoon, sir. Like Mr. Axelrod said, my name is Seth. I'm one of the student veterans here on campus. I'm currently in Hyde Park right now. When I was a Marine, I had the Commandant's reading list to kind of look to guide me when it comes to finding the right books to be reading. And I'm curious what books you would suggest for young leaders like me to broaden the horizon on American history and leadership in general.
Yeah, great question, Seth. Thanks. The books that, I'll put them into a couple of categories. There's a fiction book out there called Once an Eagle, and it is a very long, by Anton Meyer, kind of a classic book for most of the West Pointers. It's a great novel about a leader that starts off as a young enlisted troop in World War I, goes to World War II, and then something that kind of is similar to Vietnam. But it is also this remarkable novel about leadership and the contrast between his style of leadership, which is exemplary, and then kind of the careerist who is a good leader, a good combat leader, but not good at taking care of the men and women under his command. So that from a novel standpoint is good. One of my favorite books, although, is All Quiet on the Western Front. Small book. And the reason I like All Quiet on the Western Front is it is about a German soldier on the Western Front during World War I. Why is that important? Because, Seth, if you read that book and you put your name in for his name, you would have the exact same experiences. I mean, you would recognize everything this German soldier is going through. And why is that important? Because sometimes you have to recognize that the enemy, you can't always dehumanize the enemy. They are people too, and you have to recognize they are motivated in ways that might be similar to how you're motivated. So I kind of think of those two books, but of course you can see the library behind me. I would say 800 of the 1,000 or so books behind me are on everything from military strategy to special operations. You can't go wrong with Clausewitz's On War and understanding the great strategists out there as well. Duhay and Mahan and others like that.
Seth, thanks for your service and for your question. And let me just say, don't forget, Make Your Bed, Little Things That Can Change Your Life and Maybe the World, and Sea Stories, My Life in Special Operations. Two great books. Honestly, we did a wonderful podcast together, so I had to bone up for those, and I so enjoyed both of them, and I highly recommend it. A lot of leadership lessons in both those books. Let's see, we have Robert, class of 2023. Robert, where are you?
Good afternoon, Admiral McRaven. My name is Robert Deans. I'm currently a second year in the college and am spending the quarter in Hyde Park. And I'm enrolled in Air Force ROTC at the Illinois Institute of Technology. And my question has to do with, is there any advice you would give for people in ROTC or people considering joining the military after college that want to make a career out of it?
Yeah, well, I also went through the ROTC program. I went through Naval ROTC at the University of Texas, and my son went through Air Force ROTC at Clemson. So the ROTC program is phenomenal because, of course, you get the opportunity to, get a good military education as well as a more liberal education at the school you're going to. The one thing I would offer you when you get into ROTC is it's important always in any organization to learn the basics. And that's what ROTC does for you. Little things like, learn how to salute, learn how to wear your uniform, learn the ranks. You can't be a good leader unless you understand the basics of whatever organization you're going into first. So your ROTC time will give you that opportunity. It will probably also give you the opportunity to travel a little bit, take the time to talk to the enlisted men and women in the ROTC unit, take the time to talk to the officers, learn about their careers. and take those 4 years as you would at any college to absorb as much about the organization as you can. That way, when you become a second lieutenant, you'll be prepared to go out and do your job.
Thanks, Robert, and best of luck to you. Kevin, a graduate student at the Graham School, Biomedical Informatics, and an Army veteran who served in Iraq. Kevin, where are you? There you are. You're muted there, Kevin.
Thank you for taking the time, Admiral. We really appreciate it. My question is, how can we all help repair America's reputation post 45? Also, how do we communicate with people that refuse or are unable to believe or understand the truth?
Yeah, great questions. Well, one, I think internationally, on January 20th at 12:01, we are going to find that a lot of the problems we've had internationally will quickly become resolved. People, from NATO to the ASEAN nations to Africa, they want American leadership. They are begging for American leadership. And so as soon as President Biden comes in, he is not an isolationist. He is going to value the relationships that we have with NATO. He is going to value our relationships with our allies and partners, and they will recognize that on day one. So that's not to say that we don't have some bridges we need to rebuild a little bit, but I think instead of having to rebuild the bridge all in one direction, we're going to find people coming to the middle because they want us to be part of their international security realm. In terms of kind of how do you deal with friends and family, which I have a lot of, that aren't necessarily supportive of my political position, you have to listen. And you have to not be too righteous. It is easy sometimes to think that, my goodness, why don't they understand? Why can't they see what I see? Well, I would say you might want to check your pride at the door a little bit, check your sense of righteousness just a little bit, and listen. And that may not sway them, and it probably won't sway you, but I think they will be a lot more receptive if they think you're prepared to listen to them and be thoughtful about their positions. And then maybe you can begin to build, bridges a little bit easier. But if you come in and you already got your armor on, you're ready to go for a fight, that's not going to help anybody. And I don't think you'll get much traction with that.
Thank you, Kevin. Admiral, let me follow up on these questions. And you speak about what will happen the day that President Biden takes the oath of office in terms of how the world views us and how we view the world. What about yourself? Would you consider playing a role in some form or fashion in the next administration?
Yeah, David, I've always said that I'm not into politics, but like you, I like policy. And if the opportunity to work in a policy environment and to provide policy guidance were available, yeah, absolutely. I think that is in my wheelhouse. It's something I enjoy doing. So if offered, I would absolutely consider it.
What would be the most important advice that you would give the president as he takes office? Well,
I don't know if the president needs my advice.
I know, but I'm asking.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
The one thing I think is back to the previous question, almost 73 million people voted for Donald Trump. So the president is, if he is going to pull the country together, I think he is going to have to take a hard look at, what were some of their concerns, and is there a way to kind of bridge that gap, recognizing that he is going to be a president for all Americans. And if you're going to be a president for all Americans, you're going to have to do what I think Joe Biden has done exceedingly well over the years, which is, extend his hand across the aisle, see where we can get some compromise, and then move forward together. Now, you're not always going to be able to compromise. There are going to be some folks that are entrenched, but that is something he does very well. We're going to need that. When you have almost 73 million people, there's probably something in there that is of value that he must consider if he's going to be the president.
And in terms of national security, what do you see as the greatest threats that we face? We've seen the power for very little investment of cyber tactics and cyber attacks, and democracies are particularly vulnerable to that, but so is the infrastructure of countries. Where do you see the greatest threats in this era?
Yeah, I think the greatest threat to national security is K-12 education. And the reason I say that is because if we are not growing the next generation of national security leaders, if we're not teaching kids and starting in elementary school and junior high and high school, if we're not teaching them, giving them a classic liberal education where they have to think critically, where they are exposed to different ideas and different cultures, they also need to learn STEM. But education, to me, is where we need to focus our attention if we're going to grow the next generation of national security leaders. Now, when it comes to immediate threats kind of outside our boundaries, my focus would actually be on Russia. I mean, China is going to be a competitor. We recognize that. I don't really see us coming to blows with China. I think they're too smart for that, and hopefully we're too smart for that. Russia, to me, and Putin, you know, he likes to play the great game. I think he plays it, frankly, better than anyone out there. I mean, you look at what he did in Crimea and his push in Ukraine and in Syria. And of course, he has been very aggressive. He's threatened us on the high seas. He's threatened us in the air. So a miscalculation with Russia could lead to a shooting conflict. I don't know whether it would be a big war, but I'm more concerned about Russia than I am China or even North Korea. And while, you know, Kim Jong-un is, he's only concerned about the survival of his regime, I think you can understand that that's a given, and that makes him a player that you can work with because you understand what he's trying to achieve. He's a rational actor in a very irrational way.
Andrew has a question for you. Andrew, step on up here.
Hey, good afternoon, Admiral. Thank you so much for your time. It's great to have you here, and it's great to hear your insight. I have a question regarding history and historical studies. I'm part of Chicago Booth Class of 2022. To you, what is the most impactful or beneficial period of history to study as a professional leader? Wow.
You know, I've had thousands of questions over the years. I don't know that anybody's ever tossed that one my way. You know, if I had to think about history, you know, I actually, a lot of the books back here are ancient history. My sense of history is it really hasn't changed much when you think about the nature of warfare and you think about the nature of diplomacy. I will tell you, I think it is important to read how did we deal with the Cuban Missile Crisis and how did the Allies come together in World War II and what were the bad things we did in South America in the 60s. Those are all important things to understand. But if you go back and read about, you know, ancient Rome and ancient Greece, if you read Machiavelli, if you know, the fact of the matter is the dynamics between human beings haven't changed much, you know, in thousands and thousands of years. So you have to understand that, I think, kind of going into it. And then once you have this foundation and this recognition that, you know, battle doesn't really change. The weapons might change. We might get machine guns. We may go from cavalry to motorized, but the nature of warfare doesn't change. And I would offer the nature of diplomacy doesn't change. What changes are the circumstances. So read a little bit of ancient history and then find those kind of modern, you know, big ticket items like the Cuban Missile Crisis. How did Kennedy deal with that? The Vietnam War, those sorts of things, and then pull the two together. The history in between is all kind of the same, more of the same.
Thanks, Andrew. Jay, step on up here. There you are.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for speaking with us. I'm Jay Roberts. I'm a former submariner. I'm currently in Washington, D.C. and with the Booth class of 2022. My question is, what advice can you give to veterans transitioning to civilian life after a career of service?
Yeah, thanks, Jay. You know, what you're going to find is if you have to learn the business first. So when I transitioned from running SOCOM to being the chancellor of the University of Texas system, I knew nothing about higher education and nothing about healthcare. So the UT system was not just UT Austin. It's 230,000 kids, 100,000 employees, 8 academic institutions, and 6 very large healthcare institutions. I knew nothing about that. I had about a 5-month sabbatical between when I retired and when I took the job. And I'm telling you, I spent that 5 months talking to people, learning everything I could about the business. Back to the question that was posed early on about what's good in ROTC, you got to learn the basics. I needed to understand, what does a chair do? What does a dean do? What does a provost do? What's the difference between a researcher? What's the difference between an oncological surgeon and I wanted to understand the basics. Once you understand the basics, or at least as much as you can about the organization, then the leadership skills that you had as a submariner, they're transferable, they're fungible. You will immediately find that once you understand how things work and you build a matrix, you build your own little, okay, I see how this works, you will be able to maneuver very nicely. If you don't take the time up front to work hard, to learn the business, then everything you learn in the military will go for naught because you'll be struggling with understanding the basics. And then finally, it's just a matter of working hard and earning the respect of your colleagues. And you know how to do that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your service and thanks for your question. And finally, Jack, is Jack lined up here? If not, I have his question. We don't see him. Jack, who is a West Point graduate, a former Army Ranger, asks, what are the national security risks and potential benefits you see in the trend of commercialization of the space industry?
Yeah, I think the commercialization of the space industry is actually a good thing. I've got a brother-in-law who works at NASA. I've watched the space industry over the years. Oh, there he is. Are you up there? Yeah.
Yep.
So I think what NASA has been surprised by, and I've heard a number of NASA directors talk about the fact that they really didn't think that the commercialization was going to work. And of course, now it has worked. We've seen SpaceX, rendezvous with the International Space Station. I do think this kind of marriage of public and private, if you will, is going to serve the space industry well. And there are always going to be one of those folks that want to work on the kind of the federal government side with NASA, but then there are always those that want to work on the commercial side and have a little bit more latitude and freedom to be inventive and those sorts of things. And I think the partnership will serve America well.
Jack, let me, you also sent in a question that I thought was really great, and I want to quickly ask this one as well. You asked, what do you believe about leadership that everybody else thinks is crazy?
Yeah, I'm not sure I've learned anything new in leadership in terms of everything that you're going to read. I mean, we know as leaders, you've got to kind of lead from the front. You have to take care of your troops. You want to share the hardships. Those sort of things are, I think, the most, commonly known things about leadership. But the one thing I think really has stuck with me is I'll get back to hard work. Whenever I went into an organization, I found that in order to earn the respect of the men and women that I worked with, I had to work hard. I had to show up early. I had to bust my hump all day long, and I had to go home late. And I'll give you one more story. When I was a Navy captain, I was in a very serious parachute accident, and 9/11 happens, and I was asked to come to the White House. So I went to the White House. I didn't really have time to rehab. And about 18 months after my time in the White House, the SEALs down in Virginia Beach were having a commander's conference, and they invited me down. I'm a senior Navy captain. And we go down there, and as SEALs do, we got up in that morning. Everybody did a PT. We got in the PT circle, did our PT, and then we were going to go for a 10-mile run. Well, I was still kind of broken, so I go out to do the PT, And I kind of got through the push-ups, but it was hard for me to do a lot of the other things. And then we go do the run. Well, as typical SEALs, everybody starts off, it's a race. And I'm hanging tough for, all of about 100 yards. And then the guys take off. And I'm struggling because my injury was to my pelvis and it was hard to run. But as I'm running, it was a 2-mile loop around a course we were doing. As I'm running, this kid, after a while, passes me, he laps me. And as he's lapping me, he's a young officer. And as he's lapping me and I'm kind of struggling to run, he stops and he says, "Sir, what are you doing?" And I'm plodding through. I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Sir, you don't have anything else to prove. You don't need to be out here doing this. You got nothing else to prove." And I didn't say anything, and the kid ran on, and he was absolutely wrong. You have to prove something every single day. If you wake up and think you don't have anything to prove, if you wake up and you think you don't have to work harder than everybody else, that you don't have to lead better than everybody else, that you don't have to earn the SEAL Trident that you've spent, 37 years, then you're mistaken. If you're a leader, you wake up every single morning and realize you still have something to prove. When the day comes that you think you got nothing left to prove, it's time for you to move on and go do something else.
I bet you that young man who lapped you probably did think you were crazy. So that's probably a great answer to the question. But let me say, Admiral, having gotten to know you a little and knowing what the people I worked with thought about you, there's no race that you wouldn't win at the end, because your character and your commitment is really unparalleled, and your insights, not just into military issues, but into people, which is such an important part of leadership. So we are so grateful for you being here. I'm grateful for all your years of service and to know you and appreciate what you've done in the past and what you'll do in the future for our country. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks very much, David. Great to join y'all today. Thanks.
Thank you.